Today I'm here to talk about all the books I've been reading recently that are primarily under the umbrella of dark, messed up fiction, or at least I thought they were, because these are books that I set aside for my spring TBR as part of this project to get back to my roots of reading the really messed up, stabby books. And I gotta say that either these books aren't as messed up as I thought, or I've become very desensitized to this material. And if I'm honest, I think it's the second, but we're gonna talk about it here. Some of these books I recommend more than others. Some of them I think are more messed up than others. And again, that might be based off of my really subjective, biased taste as to what counts as a messed up book. But if that all sounds good, let's get started. And I do wanna mention that I've recently been on a work trip to Australia, and I just got back. I'm very jet lagged, so bear with me if I make a little bit less sense today. I'm doing my best. All right, let's go. First, let's talk about The End of Alice by A.M. Holmes, and this is a short novel that focuses on a predator who is currently in prison, and they begin a correspondence with this 19-year-old out of prison who has similar desires, and so their conversations go back and forth about their shared feelings and potentially acting upon them. In terms of a book that deals with messed up topics, this is a textbook example, and certainly was very uncomfortable to read in that regard. I'm clearly using some euphemisms to tone down what I'm describing in this video just for mindfulness, but it was very uncomfortable, and compared to something else like Lolita or My Dark Vanessa that also are under the umbrella of the same type of books that cover similar topics, I found those to be much more focused on presenting a particular character study coming from more of a literary angle that made it feel a little bit more separated from the grotesque nature of the subject itself. This one felt like it was there a little bit more for the shock and awe, and certainly, again, that made for an uncomfortable experience, and perhaps I liked it a little bit less because I felt kind of gross for reading it, as opposed to feeling like I'm kind of taking a step back and seeing it through some kind of literary lens. And so when I first talked about this book in my spring TBR, I got all kinds of opinions on it. Some people liked it. Some people sort of seemed to like it but didn't want to say they liked it and put that in writing. Other people thought it was a disgusting book, and I heard all sorts of different opinions. And I'll say that it was kind of what I was looking for in the scope of this project of trying to read books that were very dark and messed up. I didn't like it as much as I thought I would, for the obvious reasons, of course, but primarily it was the fact that the narrative was not to my taste. This is something that is often hard to describe on camera, but I do find myself being very picky about when it comes to narrative voice. And this one I found very messy. I almost want to call it a stream of consciousness, but that is really an unfair descriptor because it is not truly that style, but rather it just feels like the writing was unwieldy. It felt like it needed more editing, and that really took me out of the story, and I found myself being very distracted by the way the sentences were positioned, where the paragraphs, where the narrative was going, that actually pulled me out of it more than, again, the disgusting nature of the book itself. So I liked parts of it, or at least it ticked the boxes for my intentions with this video of sharing some of the most messed up books I've read recently, something I used to do more often. And I'm glad I read it, but I wish it had worked better for me. I think I'm kind of learning what works and what doesn't work when it comes to the title of messed up books. And again, I need to still have the quality of literature that I personally prefer, or more to my taste, regardless of the subject matter, and then I think I would have had a better time with it. Then we have My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa, and this is an author I've read before and tend to have pretty polarizing opinions about their books. I think in general, this author is one you either love or hate, or at least are going to be really hit or miss by, because they go for the extreme every time. They don't hold back. And again, if you're looking for messed up books, you pretty much just look up this entire author's backlist. This is one that's been on my radar for a while because I have read other of their books. Again, some I like more than others. I liked Eileen. I didn't love Lavona as much. I kind of did until I really didn't. And that's a whole nother story for another video. But here I'll say that this one follows a woman who is working. She has her social life and is very much struggling through her life. It's almost hard to describe this book because it doesn't have a lot of conventional plot. Instead, what we have is her meandering around and almost turning her boredom and lack of motivation, lack of direction in life, and turning it into this strange, uneven, dark character study of a plot. I think, again, if you're looking for a traditional thriller, if you're looking for a usual horror book, This one really doesn't fit any of those descriptors, and you have an incredibly unlikable character. I hear sometimes in the comments that not everyone likes unlikable characters. If you need to have some kind of connection or appreciate something about this person, I found them despicable, annoying, all of those things, which made it definitely harder to get into the story, even though I normally like unlikable characters if I can kind of cheer for them in some villainous way. Instead, I just wanted to smack her across the face, and I found her to be hard to read just because I couldn't relate to anything about why she was doing what she was doing. In terms of a messed up book, this one is uncomfortable, strange, it goes there. It plays around with a lot of things that other books don't touch, and I kind of like that about the author, that even if I don't like the choices she makes me feel something, even if that something is uncomfortable. I've talked about it before in videos that the biggest sin a book can do is be boring, and that's never really the case with this author's work, because she is always pushing buttons, she's always pushing the envelope and seeing what she can get away with and somehow still get traditionally published. I don't know how. But again, if you're interested in this one, it's not a personal favorite, as you can probably tell from the way I'm describing it, but there's still parts of it I really liked, and I will absolutely continue to read more by this author because I like what she's doing. Even if it doesn't always work for me, I still find it really interesting, and as someone who reads a lot, finding an author who can continually surprise me with new books that don't feel like their other books, that each one feels like its own crazy messed up experiment, that is going to keep me coming back for more, even if sometimes I get burned. Next we have Boy Parts by Eliza Clark, and this is a literary dark book that follows a woman who takes explicit pictures of men, and she ends up getting the opportunity at the start of this book to present them in this gallery exhibition scenario, and so she's very excited by that, but it also causes her to spiral, let's say, and everything about her life becomes more obsessive as she really just goes down this terrible rabbit hole. And so this is one I actually had very similar feelings to as the last book, where I felt that it was not a personal favorite of mine, but very much one that was unexpected, dark, pushing the envelope. I felt this one did a good job of subverting some of my expectations, or at least flipping around some gender expectations when it comes to stories like this, where normally you have more of a male gaze as the predator and instead you have this woman. It's something I think we see more and more in fiction, as there is a lot of appeal or interest for whatever reason in female readers like myself wanting to see that switched around. And this one is just, again, unexpected. It's not really the cliche of maybe what you're thinking when you read a book like this. Certainly it has some explicit material in it given the subject matter, and it's one that, again, I liked what it was doing, even if it wasn't a absolute favorite and engrossing book that I couldn't put down. I still found it really interesting. I will absolutely read more by this author. I can see why other people love them so much. I really have to check out more of their backlist, and this has been on my list of books to read for a long time, so I'm glad I checked it off the list. I don't think it was the most messed up book as opposed to some of the other ones I'm mentioning here, but again, I can't tell if that's actually because the book wasn't as taboo as I thought it was going to be, or maybe I'm just desensitized. So again, for people who have read these books I'm talking about today, I'd love to know, is my radar of messed up books just off? Because these books in general were not as out there as I thought they were going to be, and I think I'm the problem. Next, let's talk about Out by Natsuo Kirino, and this is a translated Japanese book that follows a young woman who works in a shop at night where she boxes up lunches as her job. One day she ends up strangling her deadbeat terrible husband and ends up enlisting the help of her colleagues and co-workers, these other women, to help dispose of the body. This one I really liked, and I'm glad to say that because I realized that the last couple books I was a little bit more lukewarm on. This one is fantastic. It's been on my radar, on my to-read list for so long, and I really regret waiting so long for it. Now this is one I think will really appeal to a lot of you that watch my channel and share my love for having a female character that is not naturally likable, or instead is rather morally gray and complex. You understand why she would do what she would do, even if you don't in any way endorse or support that. You kind of get it because her husband is terrible, and then you have this question or the scenario play out of what would you do, and what would you do if your colleague ropes you into this terrible act after the fact. And it's done all in this sharp, thrillery way. I think it's a really topical piece. I believe this book was written back in the 90s, or at least that was when it was translated, and it still feels so relevant today. I've been hit or miss in the past when it comes to translated fiction. Often I find myself not connecting as much with the characters as I would like, which has very much had me reflect on my own issues of, am I having trouble connecting to characters of other culture, or is it the translation itself that holds me back? So I'm really pleased to say here, while again, I don't fully love the characters for what they are doing, I thought that they were complex and well-rounded, and I really got engrossed in the story. I thought the writing, again, the translated writing is all I can comment on, but that itself was great, which often I can be critical of. And the story was just that sharp thriller, again, so topical, so relevant today, and I just thought it was a lot of fun. It's a longer book, but well worth it. Great writing, great characters. I think, again, this is one a lot of you should pick up and read if you haven't yet. Next up is Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami, and this is a story of a young boy in college. He meets this girl and something happens with her, and that is very much the catalyst, the coming of age experience for the rest of his college days, and really helps to shape and form his life. This is one I wanted to pick up because I read 1Q84 last year and really liked it despite having really messed up issues in that book. The overall story I was completely engrossed by despite the things that I ignored and really tried to push out of my head. And so this one I went into knowing that the author has a complicated relationship with his audience. He is known for writing with a male gaze and bringing in a lot of strange sexuality that doesn't really seem to fit the topic or really make sense as to be justified for why it's in the book. And you do get more of that here. This is one where I actually started reading it back in November, and I was reading it as an ebook on my phone and accidentally hit the return button, and I didn't get the book back until February. So I had the unfortunate experience of reading 70% of the book, and at the time I was very much engrossed and interested in the book, and then I had this long gap while I couldn't read it because I was too cheap to buy a copy. I was just waiting for the library copy to come back to me on Libby, and I finally got to read the last section. And when I got to the last section, I was quite let down. I largely think that it's from the space and the fact that I'd moved on to other books and stories by then, but at the same time I felt like the ending wasn't the big bang of an ending. I really wanted a aha moment, something of a great climax that we were building towards. I thought the author was going into certain spaces that he didn't go into that for me would have made the book a bit more interesting. And so based off my expectations and my lowered excitement for the book, I didn't end up loving it as much as I wanted to and found myself more critical of the weird sexual things, even though I will recognize the point that if you look at 1Q84, it does far more messed up things on a far more bigger scale, as opposed to just some of the grittiness in this one that I just felt was unnecessary. They're always talking about female parts and sexual acts, and I found it just annoying, which I think was just, again, more my mood. I found myself a lot more critical of some of the crudeness in this book, which makes me sound like a prude, and it's really not. Again, if you look at 1Q84, it arguably has objectively worse things in the book from that standpoint. However, this one, because I wasn't as engrossed in the story when I finished it, I found myself more irritated because while neither was justified, at least I was so engrossed in the other story that it allowed me to, again, kind of look past that, as opposed to this one, without being as hooked into the story, I found myself kind of looking back from afar and being more critical because of it. So needless to say, I recognize this particular review is very biased and swayed by the fact that you shouldn't put down a book partway through that you're enjoying for several months and expect to have the same experience when you finish it. So I'd love to hear from people who've read this book. What do you think of it? Because again, I think that my overall reading experience was less than ideal. Don't recommend taking several months to finish a book. It's not great. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on reading? And if you have read them already, I would love for you to weigh in. What do you think? Are these books as messed up as other people say they are? Or am I getting desensitized? What's going on here? I'd love to have your opinions. And again, you can agree, disagree. As long as we can keep it somewhat polite in the comments, I will engage with you. If you're new to my channel and do want to stick around, I do read horror thrillers and other dark things, so hit that subscribe button, hit the thumbs up if you think I deserved it, hit that little notification bell if you don't want to miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. Talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.